It starts with something small. A decision gets made and nobody asks for your opinion. Not because they forgot. Just because it didn't occur to anyone that your opinion mattered. You notice it. You don't say anything. The moment passes and the day continues the way it was already moving. Then it happens again. A different situation. A different person. But the same quiet signal. That something was distributed unevenly. That someone else received what you were also reaching for. That the scale tipped, and nobody in the room seemed to notice except you. You don't say anything this time either. It doesn't feel large enough to mention. And besides, saying something would make it a bigger deal than it probably is. So you absorb it. You file it somewhere quietly and you move on. But the filing never quite disappears. It sits there. And the next time something similar happens, it doesn't land in an empty space. It lands on top of everything already there. And slowly, without any single moment you could point to, something begins to change. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet shift in the temperature of how you feel when that person walks into the room. Or when that situation comes up again. Or when someone mentions the thing that started it. You are not angry exactly. Anger is sharp and fast and it asks for something. This is slower. Heavier. It has been building in the background for long enough that it no longer feels like a reaction to something specific. It just feels like the truth. Like the way things are. Like something you now simply know about the world and about the people in it. And the hardest part is that you can't always remember exactly when it started. The feeling is so settled now that it feels like it was always there. But it wasn't. There was a moment before it. A moment when the scale still felt even. When you still expected things to be fair. That moment is just difficult to find now, buried under everything that came after it. Carl Jung would not begin by asking what happened. He would begin by asking where the feeling went. Because that is the thing about resentment. It rarely gets expressed directly. It gets absorbed. You feel it, you decide not to act on it, and you continue with your day. From the outside nothing changes. But Jung spent a great deal of his life observing that what we push down doesn't disappear. It moves somewhere else. Into a part of the mind that operates quietly, beneath the surface, in a place Jung called the unconscious. And the unconscious is patient. It holds what the conscious mind puts down. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand. It simply keeps what was given to it. And over time, what was given to it starts to grow. Jung noticed that unexpressed emotion doesn't stay as it was when it arrived. It attaches itself to other memories. Other moments that carried a similar feeling. A look that seemed dismissive. A conversation that felt one-sided. A situation where you gave more than came back. Individually, none of these moments felt significant enough to address. But in the unconscious they find each other. They connect. And what forms is no longer just a reaction to one specific event. It becomes a pattern. A way of reading the world. This is what Jung called a complex. Not a flaw. Not a weakness. Just a cluster of experience that has gathered enough emotional weight to start influencing how you see things, without you necessarily realizing it is happening. The colleague who gets the credit you expected stops being just a colleague. They become evidence of something larger. The situation that felt unfair once starts to feel like the rule rather than the exception. And here is what Jung would want you to sit with. Underneath the resentment, there is almost always a need that never got met. A need to be seen. To be treated fairly. To matter in the way you believed you should. The resentment is not the original feeling. It is what the original feeling became after it was swallowed too many times. Jung would not tell you to let it go. He would ask you to look at it. To understand what it has been carrying and for how long. Because a feeling that has lived in the dark long enough starts to feel like the truth. And the only way to know whether it is the truth, or simply a wound that never healed, is to bring it into the light and look at it honestly. Friedrich Nietzsche noticed something that is uncomfortable to look at directly. When people feel that something was taken from them, or never given in the first place, and they can't do anything about it, the feeling doesn't just sit there quietly. It starts to move. It looks for somewhere to go. And the place it most commonly goes is into a story. Not a story that is invented deliberately. It happens slowly, without anyone deciding to do it. The person who got the promotion you were expecting stops being simply someone who got lucky. Something about them starts to look different. The way they speak in meetings. The way they carry themselves. Small things that never bothered you before start to feel like evidence of something. And the evidence builds a picture. A picture that explains why things went the way they did, and why you were the one left standing on the wrong side of it. Nietzsche called this ressentiment. And what he observed is that the story always flatters the person telling it. You become the one who saw clearly. The one who wasn't fooled. The one who understood how things actually work while everyone else was too comfortable or too naive to notice. The pain is still there underneath. But now it has a shape. Now it means something. And meaning makes it easier to carry. The tricky part is that the story feels completely true from the inside. The critical thoughts about the other person don't feel like a defense. They feel like honest observations. The sense of unfairness doesn't feel like something the mind constructed to protect itself. It feels like an accurate reading of the situation. And that is exactly what makes it so difficult to question. Because as long as the story holds, there is no reason to look beneath it. The resentment has found a comfortable place to live. It has stopped being a wound and started being a worldview. The person is no longer someone who was hurt by something specific. They are someone who now knows something true about the way the world treats people like them. Nietzsche wasn't saying the original hurt wasn't real. He was pointing at what the hurt becomes when it is never looked at directly. When pain turns into a story, and the story turns into an identity, putting it down starts to feel like losing something. Even when what you would be losing is the very thing that has been quietly weighing you down. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that people suffer. Not occasionally, not because life goes wrong sometimes, but as a baseline condition of being human. We want things. We expect things. And the world, and the people in it, consistently deliver less than what we felt we were owed. For Schopenhauer, this wasn't a pessimistic observation. It was just an honest one. And resentment, in that context, made complete sense to him. It is what happens when a person has been quietly absorbing that gap, between what was expected and what arrived, for long enough that the absorption itself becomes exhausting. What Schopenhauer adds is something worth sitting with. He noticed that unexpressed suffering doesn't stay contained. It spreads. The person carrying a heavy load of unacknowledged resentment doesn't just feel it privately. It starts to show up in small ways in how they move through the world, in how much warmth they can offer on a given day, in how much patience they have for the people around them. Not because they are unkind, but because they are full. And when something is already full, there is no space left for anything else to come in. Max Scheler saw something that Schopenhauer didn't quite reach. He pushed back against the idea that all resentment points to something distorted in the person carrying it. He drew a careful line. There is resentment that grows from wounded pride, from someone who feels inferior and cannot accept it, and so rewrites the world to make the feeling bearable. But there is also resentment that is simply the honest response of someone who was repeatedly powerless in the face of something genuinely unfair. Someone who had no voice, no recourse, no way to address what was happening. And who carried the weight of that quietly, because there was no other option available to them. Scheler's distinction matters because from the outside, both look identical. And from the inside, both feel completely justified. Which means the question of which kind you are carrying is not always easy to answer. It requires a kind of honesty that is genuinely difficult when the feeling has been sitting long enough to feel like the truth. What Schopenhauer and Scheler together point toward is this. Resentment is never just a personal failing. It is always a signal. About something that was needed and not received. About a gap that was real, or felt real enough to leave a mark. The question worth sitting with is not whether the feeling is reasonable. It is whether the weight of carrying it is still serving you, or whether it has simply become the heaviest thing in the room that nobody is talking about.